Hello, everybody. This is going to be the little lecture discussion of the Imperialists article. Let me pull it up real quick. Oh my goodness, I wish the Zoom thing would get out of my way so I can, there we go. Okay, so I'll echo this at the start of both videos. It is imperative that you read and understand these articles. They will be on the final exam. I don't know if they will just be included in the short answer or multiple choice questions. I know in some other classes that I've seen Dr. Dreifert teach, he has included essays, outside essays, as short essay questions. So not as long as the long essays on our previous exams, but a page or two, and you'll be expected to really understand and know these articles. So read it multiple times, print it out, highlight it, take notes, do whatever you got to do. Feel free to touch base with me either in class or via email about any questions you have or any other information that you want or anything really. So without further ado, let's hop into the Imperialists article. I'll first go over the people that they talk about and kind of some of the qualities that I think really stand out and become important in what the author is trying to communicate about British identity and how the British understand themselves both as a people and as an empire. So the first people they talk about here are the explorers, Henry Staley and Edward Eyre. Henry Staley is more associated with Africa, and Edward Eyre is more associated with Australia. But both these men they're not just explorers. They are both politicians. They're both worldly. They're both educated men. I think they're both born outside of the United Kingdom proper. They both go through a lot of levels of education, and not just formal education, but kind of a life education, and traveling around the world a lot and engaging with a lot of other cultures and a lot of other kind of lifestyles. But above all else, these are manly men. That the overarching kind of theme that we're going to get here is that British men are superior to other men. That this idea of British exceptionalism is really going to be important. That there was a Dutch exceptionalism before in the 1600s, and there's an American exceptionalism today that we understand both because of political, cultural, social, a litany of factors, and because of something inherent in our kind of our DNA that we are somehow superior. But at this time period, the way that you would demonstrate superiority, one of the prime ways of doing that is through military success and overt displays of strength, aggressiveness, and just overt might. So I pulled up a couple of descriptions of Stanley and Eyre here. Stanley's described as being bullet-headed, truculent, with a walrus mustache, and he embarks on these colossal journeys into the heart of Africa. These kind of very heroic, masculine, strong depictions of themselves and also what they do. And the same thing goes for Edward Eyre, who, when he's traversing the arid deserts of Australia, they talk about him sucking the morning dew from a sponge because he's out of water. And when he becomes the colonial governor of New Zealand and Jamaica, he does these very overtly ruthless and violent and strong kind of crackdowns on the native populations. So the way that you made the British Empire strong was by producing men who were strong and who could go overseas and embark on these important scientific and exploration kind of endeavors, but also on military endeavors that we'll talk about in a little bit. And just to kind of point out how important that how exploration is important for this, that the main kind of distinction and difference between colonialism and the new imperialism of this time period is that colonialism relied heavily on trade along the coasts. That the empires, I guess, perhaps save North America. North America is the outlier in this case. But to any empire that wanted to engage in Southeast Asia or in Africa or in India or in South America, generally they weren't going into the heart of those places. That there was no reason for a British person to traverse into the jungles of the Congo in Africa, or into the jungle or the deserts of the Sahara. But now the new imperialism was really reliant on claiming territory. And to claim territory, you had to be able to explore territory and have the kind of manual power to exert control and influence in those territories. So now this exploration aspect is actually incredibly important, both in terms of politics and military stuff and economics. As you know, there's new mines and stuff in Africa and in Asia that you can't access on the coast that these imperial powers want. But it's also about being a man. That, you know, traversing Africa, Stanley's the first person to go coast to coast in Africa. That, you know, these feats of exploration now demonstrate how British people are superior. In the same vein, the soldiers kind of feel the same way. The general, or just the officer Wolsey in the Crimean War in the 1850s talks about the first business of any ambitious officer was to try to get himself killed. And if you're familiar at all with Theodore Roosevelt or America in the 1890s, this is something that you will recognize immediately. That the kind of dangerousness of war was actually something that many men aspired to and wanted. That the way that you prove yourself as a superior being was by surviving these kind of very dangerous military conflicts. It wasn't just important for military aspects too, it became an aspect to be wanted in all of British culture. That the operetta Pirates of Penzance by Gilbert and Sullivan, which is still performed today in a lot of places, Wolsey becomes the archetype for one of the characters, the model of the modern major general. That this is not just something to further British political and economic gains, but this is something to aspire to. That we want all of our men to have the ability to be modern major generals. That want to have the intelligence, the rectitude, the moral uprightness, the strength, and the power to be these military men or these explorers. And of course, they all fight with great success across the world, from South and Central Africa to Palestine to Afghanistan to India to the Caribbean to the West Indies and the East Indies. You know, all over the place, British military might is being flexed. That term flex is, I think, really important, because it's just like how a man would flex his muscles. Empires were flexing military strength. Less important, but I like some of the characterizations of him in terms of thinking about this masculinity and this British manly superiorness. They talk about the Admiral John Fisher having nostrils dilated like a bull's. You know, that's a very overt image of strength and power if I've ever seen one. You know, if you want to be terrifying to your enemies, it's pretty good to be perceived as a bull. A little bit less overt because she's not a man, but she still kind of embodies these manly qualities and these strong qualities that British people want their nation to be identified with. I'm going to read this quick passage from the second to last page about Queen Victoria herself. The Queen Empress was the image and summit of the empire, revealing in herself many of the strains of the British Imperium, proud and often overbearing, but with an unexpected sweetness at the heart, suburban and sometimes vulgar, sentimental, in old age less beautiful than imposing, girlishly beguiled with the mysteries of the Orient, maternally considerate towards the natives, stubbornly determined to hang on to her possessions, seduced by high words, dazzling persons, lofty projects, colors, and impatient of all things small, meticulous, or self-effacing. So although Queen Victoria is a woman, she still embodies some of these kind of manly and powerful qualities that they wanted to see in the British nation. Things like overbearing, proud, imposing, stubborn, and kind of the very last thing, impatient of things small, meticulous, and self-effacing. You know, who was small, meticulous, and self-effacing in Victorian culture? It was women. Women were supposed to be smaller in stature. They were supposed to be kind of more concerned with the kind of exigencies, the specificities of clothing and of the home. That's something that's meticulous. And, you know, self-effacing, of course, is not something that a masculine man a manly man of the 1890s and the early 20th century would want to be. So even in this woman, Queen Victoria, you see a lot of these kind of very powerful, superior masculine qualities. I don't want to say I will talk about masculinity and manliness as being a big part of this, but it's really about superiority, that this idea of British exceptionalism that we'll talk about here now. that's what's really important here. I just think that you can understand that exceptionalism and that superiority best if you understand it from the perspective of manliness and masculinity. But these Brits were wholeheartedly the kind of the vanguard or the upper echelons of the new imperialism. These stoic, honorable men with rectitude who used superior skill and technology and had this kind of this superior ethos to take up that Rudyard Kipling poem, The White Man's Burden to Civilize the Globe. In a lot of literature, this is explicitly referred to as a civilizing mission. That the logic followed that Brits were the superior country and race in the world, and therefore we had a duty, or in what's a lot of older things is called a noblesse oblige. You have a kind of the royalty has an obligation to the lower classes to kind of provide and make a better world for them. We saw that in the Ancien regime in France, and in kind of the pre-revolutionary or the pre-Civil War era in England. But now, once again, English people see they have a duty, a civilizing mission to take up the white man's burden and civilize lesser peoples of the globe. And it kind of stems from this progressive or millennial or teleological belief in a linear ascension of mankind. And millennial and teleological just meaning here that civilization has steps that every civilization has to kind of go through until you reach a highest point of existence, that there is a kind of final stance that all countries, all people will get to that is the best way of living. We saw this happen in the 1890s in the early 20th century with this kind of imperialism, that they thought that by using technology and kind of racist ideas about genetics and social Darwinism, that they could make society the best it could possibly be, and it could be no better. This idea is also echoed in the 1980s and 1990s and the early 2000s after the fall of the Soviet Union. There's a book by a guy named Francis Fukuyama. The name is escaping me now, but there was a thought that liberal democracies like the United States and capitalist liberal democracies like Western Europe and the United States had achieved the kind of highest form of civilization. This was the best way to govern people and govern the world, was through these kind of liberal, not in the way that we've talked about classical liberalism in the 1800s, but of a kind of post-World War II internationalist, human rights focused liberalism was the best way to govern the world and to govern individual states. That completely fell by the wayside after the war on terror started, and no one really believed that anymore. But there's still people today that would kind of, maybe they wouldn't explicitly say it, but they would, we all think that there is perhaps a most perfect way of governing society. History generally tells us this is not true, that culture and society is too complicated for us to achieve some kind of perfection, that there's always going to be bad things happening and good things happening. This isn't something that just was prevalent in kind of imperial cultures too. Marxism too is in a large extent grounded in teleology, in the idea that a classless society is the best society, and that we will inevitably, through class warfare and through that kind of dialectic materialism that we talked about before last class, class warfare will inevitably come and will inevitably make a perfect classless society. So that's something that is kind of prevalent ever since the 1840s, 1850s, that people are trying to make a perfect society, a Utopian society. And the Brits thought they were going to do this because they were exceptional. They were the best of the world, but they were the best people the world had to offer. And this they saw through their kind of manly qualities. The article talks about British men were taller and had broader chests, and they could do these military feats. They were more successful in the battlefield. They were more successful explorers. They were more successful in technological development. And through all these kind of imperial struggles, they had made themselves superior human beings. And the article talks a little bit about this being a factor or a feat caused by British public schools, because they teach superior teamwork and responsibility and duty through athletics, but also through actual curriculum. and that's part of the idea, is that Britain is actively creating better men. But part of it too is that just that Brits were inherently better than continental Europeans, which of course is not entirely true. This is a issue of you see your culture as superior. Everyone sees their culture as superior. Everyone sees their nation as superior. You don't want to think of yourself as inferior. That doesn't make any sense. And of course, this is the focus on military strength, power politics, and overt aggressiveness and masculinity, that really you kind of see these ideas coming through. But once again, what I want you to really remember, and it's important for the exam and for understanding these things, is that the British truly did see themselves as exceptional. You know, it absolutely wasn't true. Like I put here in the bottom, this is absolutely not the full story. We have to remember perspectives, that if you were an African or an Indian or a Jamaican, or if you were an imperial subject, you probably thought the British sucked. I mean, not all of them thought the British sucked. A lot of them had good trading relationships, or whatever, but plenty of people were actively oppressed by British military might. It was just that the British saw that strength as a key part of advancing society and advancing civilization, which is what their ultimate goal was using this British exceptionalism and this British superiority to make a better world. And although they wholeheartedly failed at that, and they killed a lot of people in the process, and in many ways, this imperialism is way over half what causes World War I and kills 20 million people. They genuinely thought that. And that's what you really need to take away from this article, and just think about how and why did British people see themselves as the best of what the world had to offer in terms of empire, and what did that mean, and what did the Brits want to do with that in the coming years. I think that'll end us here. Like I said at the start, read this article very, very well, know the material by heart, and you'll be good on the exams. See y'all later. I'm gonna stop my share here and stop the recording.